man down, police, blow the man down.
To me way, blow the man down.
Blow the man down, police.
I'm Paul Bennett here at Downeast Thunder Farm in Milbridge, Maine. And today in this video, I'm going to show you what I go through every year, annual maintenance on our portable generator. This is quite necessary because the beginning of the long cold winter season, you want to have a generator, at least in this area, you want to have a portable generator that's all ready to go and that you can rely on, because we have a lot of power outages. It's quite common. We get a lot of heavy duty nor'easter storms and it's always taking down power lines, and it can be well below zero, and we have an oil burner that requires electricity in order to provide heat, to run the blower and run the fuel pump and that sort of thing, and also the circulating pumps, because we have radiant heat running through our floors and we have to circulate that water. We also have to run our well pump so we have plenty of good fresh water supply, and of course we want to be able to cook and have a few lights and other things. We want to be comfortable. We want to run our freezer. We want to run our refrigerator. And our generator has a large enough capacity where it can run our household needs without any problem. But you don't want to wait until the last minute, go out there and try to start the generator when you need it, and it won't start. But if you do maintenance on a regular basis, then you shouldn't have a problem. And so the big maintenance is right at the beginning of the season, and that's what I'm going to show you here. Change the oil, clean the air filter, clean out the carburetor, and maybe flush out some of the fuel, freshen it up, add new fuel with conditioner in it, and of course I run the generator. When I'm finished, I didn't show that in the video. It starts up and runs all the time because I maintain it, but I ran it for a while, and just to be safe, I plugged a few things in to make sure that the generator itself, not just the engine, the prime mover, but the generator itself would do its job, and it was producing electricity. And I also do that during the year. Every maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I just start the generator up and I let it run for about 20 minutes to half an hour, and just to let it run and make sure that it's reliable and it's going to start every time and there are no problems. And then I freshen up the fuel a little bit, and I do that all winter long. I do run it a few times during the summer, but not very often. It pretty much doesn't get used during that time period, and so it just sits around doing nothing. And that's why I do the big maintenance right at the beginning of the season. So here we go. I'm going to show you exactly what I do every single year. It's pretty easy, and you can do it yourself if you don't want to take it to a dealer and have it, and pay to have it done. If you're capable, if you've worked on small engines, you work on your lawnmower every year, do your own maintenance, then you can certainly do it on a small generator like this. So stay tuned, and please remember to give me a like. Please share the video, not just with friends, but maybe on Facebook and other social media, and help me get the word out. I appreciate it. Subscribe and ring the bell. Do all those good things, and so we can keep these videos going. And a big thank you to all my patrons on Patreon. Much appreciated. Thank you for the support, and thank all of you for watching. It's that time of year. I have to get the generator prepared for the winter ahead. And that's usually when power goes out. And of course, without power, you have no well water, oil-fired heating system. That's not going to work either. It can be problematic. Got to keep the refrigerator and freezer going. This particular generator is a 7,500 watt generator, and it'll handle the house load, most of it anyway, all the critical stuff. And what I have to do now, the reason why you see this suspended is that the oil drain plug is right here, and when this is sitting on a flat surface, there's not enough room to really get any kind of a drain pan underneath. So I just leave it suspended high enough where I can easily get the pan under using my tractor, and This is part of my lift system for my generator so that I can move it around the property easily. And I did a video on how I built this, and maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, maybe 3 or more years ago actually. And I'll put a link in the video description below if anybody's interested. If you do happen to have a tractor, it just makes it a lot easier to move a large generator around. Because this is kind of bulky, it's heavy. It's not easy to wheel it around on a gravel surface, especially when the ground is soft. So I'm just going to get some wrenches, I'll start draining this oil, and I'll do all the other maintenance I have to do to get it ready for the winter. And this oil doesn't really look too dirty. Of course, it doesn't have much runtime on it. Past couple of years I haven't needed it very much. Got pretty lucky. But it's a good thing to change the oil anyway, because it will absorb some moisture and there are acids that build up in it. So putting fresh oil in will help protect the bearings and other moving components inside the engine. Now that the oil is changed, next thing I'm going to do is remove the air filter. And in this case, I can take the air filter cover off without any tools. Of course, it's going to vary depending on what you have for a generator. And what I have for an air filter, it's really just a sponge, and that traps the particles. This type of air filter can be cleaned out in solvent, and then I'll let it dry, and I'll squeeze a little bit of light oil into it and just squeeze it and work all the oil in. I'll take out that baffle. That keeps the sponge air filter from getting sucked into the carburetor. And now I just have to get a few tools so I can take off this air filter housing. I want to get at the carburetor. The carburetor has to be thoroughly cleaned. And the big problem with this type of carburetor, it's a aluminum or pot metal carburetor, is that the ethanol in the fuel has a tendency to corrode the inside of the carburetor and all the jets get gunked up. So even though I treat the fuel for ethanol, but this still happens. Some newer engines have a high temperature plastic carburetor body, and it eliminates the problems with the ethanol, but this is an older generator. First, I have a couple of breather hoses I have to disconnect from the air filter. That's pretty easy to do. Just undo a couple of clamps and slide off the hose. Sometimes it's sticking a little bit just from sitting with age. Needs a little help just to loosen it, and then you can pull it off. Okay, I've got those two disconnected, and now I can take off these nuts that are holding the air filter onto the carburetor. There was one bolt on the back side I've already taken off, and then that'll get the air filter housing out of the way. 10 millimeter. Okay, no problem. These nuts that are holding on the air filter housing also hold the carburetor onto the engine, so there's not a whole lot that you have to take off. That's all there is to that. Not much to it. Now, before I can pull off that carburetor, there's a couple more things I have to do. I have to disconnect the fuel line In this case, I have a fuel petcock, and it shut off when that little valve there, the arm is horizontal, it means it's off. So I can disconnect it. There might be a little bit of dribble, but that's okay. And I usually drain this at the end, towards the end of the season. It's going to be sitting all summer. I drain the fuel out with the petcock off so there's nothing in the line anyway. And this fuel filter I replace maybe every couple of years. It's not clogged with anything, it's pretty clear, so I'm going to let it go for another season. Just take off this gasket so it doesn't get ripped. And the only thing now is this throttle linkage. It goes to the governor. The governor operates the throttle. And I have to disconnect it. It's a little bit difficult trying to work around the camera because everything's kind of tight, but I'll do my best. There's a little spring, and I have to disconnect the spring. And then, when this carburetor comes off, I have to turn it a little bit to get it in position so I can undo the governor rod there. There we are. You have to twist the carburetor so that where it's locked into place there's a little opening and it slides out. Now the carburetor's off and I can disassemble the carburetor and clean it. A lot of times you take off a carburetor, it's going to be full of gasoline, old gas, and when you tilt it, you move it around, what's going to happen is the gas is going to come out all over the place, so make sure you have a pan or something. And in this case, I did drain it, so we're good. Although there was gasoline left in the float bowl that's all dried out now. It wasn't much, but I'm sure I'm going to find some corrosion. What I'm doing is I've got the carburetor upside down and I'm going to remove the float bowl. Now the reason I'm doing this upside down is because there's a little needle valve assembly that could come falling out. And this does have some corrosion, evidence of ethanol corrosion and dirt that I'm going to have to wash and clean. This does not look bad though. I'm looking inside the float bowl. Usually there's a lot of sediment. This is the little float. It's the needle valve float. It operates a little needle valve, and that's what adjusts the amount of fuel, the amount of fuel that can enter the float bowl. And if you're running hard and you're using a lot of fuel, of course the float, the gasoline in the float bowl is going to go down and the float drops, and that opens the needle valve. When you're running at lower speeds, what happens is the float bowl starts filling up with gas, and you don't want to flood the engine, so this little float starts floating upwards and it closes the needle valve. Then no more gas can come in until there's a demand for it. And I'm pulling out, there's a little pivot pin right here. I don't want to lose that. And I'm pulling out the little needle valve, and the little needle valve is right there. And it looks clean, so I'm not going to do anything with it. This whole carburetor actually looks pretty clean. So I think we're in good shape. But I'm going to spray it down with some carburetor cleaner anyway, just for good measure. And I'll spray it through the jets, and I'll start putting it back together. Now if this were heavily corroded, I have to do some more extensive cleaning. You want to be careful when using cleaners like this carburetor cleaner, because it has some nasty chemicals, and so if you can avoid getting it on your skin, that's what you should try to do. I mean, if you get it on, you can wash it off, but just try to avoid it altogether. I'm just going to blow this into the jets. This carburetor is relatively simple, there's not much to it. And it's not too dirty. Okay, my carburetor cleaner was pretty much empty, that can I had, but I've got a brand new one. This will help. I'm just putting it everywhere, and I can see where it's blowing out through the jet, so I don't have much to worry about here. I think I'm in good shape. There's not much else to do on that. Maybe get an air compressor and blow it out. So I did take some compressed air and I blew it through the ports and everything. I didn't think I should make you have to suffer through that. It's not a big deal. And I'm going to take this needle valve assembly and I'm putting it back into place. And do so carefully. This stuff is kind of delicate. Make sure you didn't lose your pin, your pivot pin. And this will, when you're handling the carburetor, this little pivot pin can slide right out and you can lose it easily. So, you know, just keep an eye on it. Be careful when you're handling it. And make sure you align the float bowl in its proper alignment. Otherwise, sometimes the float bowl can hang up and it won't work properly. So take note of that when you're taking it apart so you see which way it's oriented on the carburetor body. Because a lot of these will fit multiple ways. There's a little O-ring, but I think it's still good. I like to replace them if I can, but I don't have a spare with me right now. And you don't have to muscle this back together. Remember, this is only like a little piece of brass. Okay, and I have it back together. So at this point I can reassemble and put the carburetor back in place. But before I do, as long as I have everything apart, this has been sitting for a long time, and even though the fuel has been treated, there's a little bit of water and gunk and crap that settles down towards the bottom of the tank, and it's going to go right through the fuel petcock. So I'm going to drain out a bunch of that bad gas before I add some new fresh treated gas to it, and that'll blend with some of the gas that's already in there, older treated fuel, and it'll freshen it up and it should be fine. Typically I just put the fuel hose into a container, turn on the petcock, and I have some old gas now draining into the container. And I don't have to drain a whole lot. I'm just gonna maybe take a quart of fuel out, and if there's any sediment at the bottom, water and whatever that's separated out of the fuel, even though it has treatment in it, I'll get it in this container. I used to drain the entire tank and just use the old fuel and things like lawnmowers and stuff that aren't that sensitive to the fuel. These newer engines are somewhat sensitive, and the fuel has to be in pretty good quality and not have a lot of junk in it. And I don't do that anymore. I found that just the stuff going to the bottom, you drain that out and that's fine. Because these tanks can hold quite a bit of fuel, and you're not going to use that much in your lawnmower in the season, I don't think. And it's the end of the season now. You have to sit and wait another year, or another winter I should say. Okay, now there's a run position, and well, there's two positions on the fuel petcock. I'm running it through both positions just to make sure I get everything. And it's running out pretty fast. A lot of times if I want to drain out a whole lot more fuel, I'll just connect an extra fuel line on here and let it run into a larger container. And I just walk away, come back later, because it can take a while. And I'm not going to ask you to sit through the whole thing. I'm pretty much finished with doing my maintenance, yearly maintenance that I go through every year. But there's one thing that I haven't done yet, and I saved that for last. I'm taking off the spark plug cap, and I'm going to pull the spark plug out and take a look at it. Now, I shouldn't have to replace it because these newer generators have electronic ignition, and the plugs last a whole lot longer, and you can probably get a few years of use depending on how much you use your generator before you have to replace the spark plug. The older generators Probably want to put in a new one every season. And it doesn't take much to get these out. They're usually fairly easy access on most generators I've seen. I don't have to take anything off to get to it. And another thing, the head of the engine, it's just aluminum. When you're putting the spark plug back in, you want to start the threads by hand, just using your fingers. Don't. It's real easy to cross thread them, and then that damages the head, and it's a whole thing. This spark plug looks pretty good. It's been burning about the way it should, and I'm not going to get into reading spark plugs and all that, because that has to do with when you have problems and so forth. This is just normal maintenance. It's not caked up with carbon. It's not burning too lean. It doesn't, it'd be kind of almost like a whitish color. It looks fine. It's pretty clean. But there is some corrosion at the top of the spark plug. I do have a bit of corrosion, but I don't have to replace the spark plug. I'll just clean that up with a little bit of sandpaper and it'll be fine. And I could actually replace this. This has one of those tops that screw on, and I could replace that with another one I have from old plugs. Just take one off and put one on here. But I'll just clean this up. It's not really bad. A little bit of surface corrosion. Hey, I'm back. I just cleaned this up with a little 220 sandpaper, and I was looking around for some dielectric grease, because it'll allow the current to pass through, but it'll keep the corrosion from building up on it. It's not really necessary. It's nice if you have it. I couldn't find mine, so I'm not going to use it this time around. When I put it back in, I just want to use my fingers. I'm putting it in because I want to make sure that the threads are starting properly. I don't want to cross thread it. I have to be very careful about that. And that's a whole big problem if you do cross thread it. That involves taking the engine apart, taking the head off, having to install a thread insert. That's not the kind of thing that most homeowners would have. It requires some special tools and a little bit of skill and knowledge there, and that gets expensive. So I have it started by hand, and you don't have to muscle these when you're putting them in. You run it in until you feel it bottom out. I'm doing now. And if you look at your manual, you probably have a torque setting. I've never seen anybody get out a torque wrench really. It's now bottomed, and I just give it a little snug. It has a compression ring at the base. It acts like a seal, and it'll be fine. You don't want to muscle it, because again, those are aluminum threads. When you put the spark plug cap back on, make sure it's all the way in, and that's all there is to that. It's not a big deal.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor?